I played in the Chicago White Sox and Minnesota Twins organizations for 8 years. That's when my drinking became normalized because I was a boy. I was 18 years old entering this man's world. So after a game, it's like a second or third shift type job. You get to the field at 2, you do your training pregame, then you have batting practice. And then as a pitcher, I'm only throwing once every 5 days. So 3 of those days being in your early 20s, we'd be out at the bars, burning the candle at both ends. And I'd be like, man, I need one more shot. I just want one more. And that carried through my filmmaking as well, which we'll get into, I'm sure, because alcohol is everywhere in Hollywood.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Willpower Podcast. Today, I have a really special guest. He is a professional athlete. He's been in film. He's worked in film. He's been a coach. He's a professional baseball player. I mean, the list goes on. And I'm just so excited to have this conversation with Eric Fischer. Hey, Eric, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to exploring a multitude of areas of, curiosity-based topics. So,
yeah. I was so excited to have this conversation with you and just kind of just talk about everything that is on my mind. I'm excited to get into it with you. So, Eric, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I just kind of gave a brief synopsis, but that was weak. I want you to tell us about who you are.
Yeah, I'll be quick so we can, maybe intertwine it more so throughout. But yeah, I played in the Chicago White Sox and Minnesota Twins organizations for 8 years. I was a high school draft pick out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And post baseball, I was defined by the game. And so when I got done playing, I had 4 surgeries, and that ultimately, you're either a liability or an asset in professional sports. And I became a liability. So I was forced to exit the game. And I was like, what am I going to do next? But in many ways, I already knew, because throughout my entire life, I was I was only interested in becoming a professional athlete at a young age. And I have a little story to tell about that, here in a moment. And then film. And so when I got done, I was sitting on the back of my car when the Minnesota Twins GM called me and said, we're not going to renew your contract. And I was 27. And I was like, at that point in time, I owned a small little baseball facility. Part of my life as well has been coaching primarily athletes, which has now changed, but that's been 23 years and going strong. And so I sold my facility. I sold my little condo that I had. I rented out my condo, sold my training facility, and enrolled in Cal State out in LA with the hopes of entering the film industry. And I didn't really know what that meant yet, whether it would have been a writer, producer, director, et cetera. But college and higher education has always been a priority in my life. And being a high school draft pick, I forewent school. So I had signed at University of Tennessee for baseball and had forewent. So I went back to school afterwards in LA, and I was single too, and I was like, man, what better way to go to school than in SoCal? So I packed my keyboard and my clothes and headed west. So nice. That's but yeah, other than that, I'm a Midwestern guy who grew up, mom and dad are still married. I'd say middle class, and no real drama or trauma, in my childhood from a family home perspective. Middle school, like many of us out here in the world, middle school for me was torturous. A lot of bullying was going on. I got my ass handed to me in the hallway a couple times. But all those early,
you were a late bloomer guy. You're a big dude. I mean, you're a pro athlete. Yeah. So what did you just hit? You hit a growth spurt when going into high school or whatever?
No, I mean, I looking back again, there was this interesting dynamic where I started to become kind of, I don't want to say known, but respected as an athlete around 12 years old. We had won a national championship. That's when I transitioned. This is when the whole, select and travel baseball and travel sports was really becoming more and more popular. And so I didn't play any sports for the school. And see, my father is an entrepreneur and he's from the west side of Cincinnati. And the west side of Cincinnati is much more blue collar, hard knocks, you're a grinder, etc. And then he had moved to the east side, which is the new money and a little bit more wealthy. And so I was stuck in this situation, especially mentally, where I was going to this extremely wealthy public school, but yet inside of my home, it wasn't that way. It was still very blue collar. And then there was, I'd say, quite a bit of jealousy in middle school because I was this above average athlete, traveling all over the country for baseball and basketball, but yet I wasn't playing any sports for them. And middle school kids are awful. I have a 12-year-old who's in 6th grade right now, and it'll be interesting to see how she navigates those waters, but yeah. So anyway, so there was that kind of like that internal struggle in a way between school and then my home life. And, but no, I mean, I did come into my athleticism on the earlier side of life. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool, man. So at 12 is like when you started realizing that you had some serious talent. And didn't you mention to me that your father was a professional athlete too?
He played football. Yep. And then I had 2 uncles that played basketball overseas. My sister played college tennis. And so, yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of art and a lot of music in my family as well. So we're diverse that way, I'd say.
Yeah. I'm saying you guys are a super talented family. That's really cool. So Eric, can we talk about, let's just start from the beginning. So after baseball, actually, let's start way back. Let's go to like high school and stuff. So we're around the same, I think you're actually a little younger than me, but what was high school like for you? Like, where like the party scene? Like, when did you first get introduced to alcohol or anything?
Yeah, I went to a private all boys Catholic high school.
Oh man.
And yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we were those out here too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say it taught me. I went to Archbishop Moeller High School, where King Griffey Jr. went, and Barry Larkin, and a lot of really well-known athletes have come out of this school. And I really have a profound appreciation for going through that school system. However, there's a lot of telling, not suggesting in the environment, meaning like when I tell you to jump, sort of environment. And I do not necessarily agree with that. But in terms of alcohol, the being an athlete, alcohol wasn't really in my world. My senior year, I mean, you have to understand something too, though. By the time I was like 16 years old, I was having general managers from Major League Baseball teams coming to my home. Yeah. So I had the blinders on to anything other than baseball by the time I was 16.
I mean, you kind of got to be, right? When you're that good at a sport, and it's so rare. It's like 1% of like the population can become a professional athlete. So yeah, you really got to put all your eggs in that basket and focus on that to get to that level, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I will say now that I know, now that I'm in recovery from a severe addiction, and that didn't touch my nose, let's say, until I was 38, 39 years old, I've historically been rather impulsive. And so alcoholism and impulsivity, man, those two go hand in hand. And you don't know what you don't know, right? And then, and it's kind of like those traits were always in me to become an alcoholic. And alcoholism runs in my family as well, both sides.
Was it?
Yeah. And so for those who believe that it's hereditary, I certainly fall into that bucket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, me too. I mean, my dad didn't die from alcohol, but he died early, and he definitely drank plenty. And so I'm in my grandfather and his grandfather, I mean, like it's definitely in our blood, my family's blood. And I noticed that too, just fell right so easily into it. So when did you start, so when did you start drinking?
Around 18. Yeah.
18.
So senior year in high school, so you get done in high school around June, and I knew I was going in the draft. The Major League Baseball draft is June 2nd and June 3rd. Now this is 20 something years ago, right? So the whole draft process has changed dramatically now. But at that point in time, I remember I would have some after basketball, like those Friday night high school basketball games, man, like us players would go to somebody's home, the parents would take the keys, and we'd go down in the basement and like play music and hang out and have some drinks. But very innocent, I'd say, looking back. None of us were waking up the next day throwing up or anything like that. But professional baseball, on the other hand, that's when my drinking became normalized in a way, because I was a boy. I was 18 years old entering this man's world, and I was playing with guys who were out of college, 24, 25, and up from there in age. So after a game, it's like a second or third shift type job. You get to the field at 2, you do your training pregame, then you have batting practice. And then as a pitcher, I'm only pitching a starting pitcher. I'm only throwing once every 5 days.
Right.
So 3 of those days being in your early 20s, we'd be out. We'd be out at the bars, burning the candle at both ends. And I was the person who everybody's leaving the bar. And I'd be like, man, I need one more shot. I just want one more, and that carried with me. That carried through my filmmaking as well, which we'll get into, I'm sure, because alcohol is everywhere in Hollywood. And
it's probably everything is everywhere in Hollywood.
Every meeting,
right? Every
meeting. They have a saying, you'll be sitting at Sundance or Cannes or Toronto Film Festival, and it's rosé all day.
That's their motto.
And they mean it.
Yeah.
It's real. So it was, for me, alcoholism was progressive. I never, looking back, I don't feel as though I was a guy, like we'd go out and play golf on a Saturday afternoon, have drinks, go to somebody's house, cook out, have drinks, have an extra at the end of the night, right before we're about to go home. But I'd wake up and not need a drink. I'd wake up and be in the gym. I'd have a little hangover. I'd feel foggy and wasn't as clear. But I'd carry on, and very productive. So we think.
Right. And just think about how, if you even weren't doing any of that, like, I wonder the level that you could have gotten to. I mean, I'm not saying that your career by any means is just the fact that you got into the professional ball is insane. When did you start realizing that it was becoming detrimental to your health, or just becoming an annoying nuisance, or just something to keep an eye on? Like, when did it start becoming an issue or whatever?
Yeah, no, that to me is still palpable, and I kind of purposefully keep it that way. I keep it just outside of my reach because I always want to remember the self-destructive behavior I allowed myself to, undertake. But for me, I've made over 20 movies over the span of roughly 15 years, and was involved with large transactions, and was in the boys club, so to speak, of the industry. But it wasn't until I did not start drinking uncontrollably until we had moved. We had 2 daughters, one who's now 9, one was just born October of 2015. And so I promise I'm going to come to the solution here about drinking. So, but I have to provide, a little bit of context.
Give us some, context.
I got to give some context here. So a prominent financing firm, film financing firm, had financed 2 of my movies, and both of them both were through Lionsgate, and one ended up being sub-distributed through Netflix. Blue Mountain State is the name of the show. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, the football show. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know one of the guys that sorry to go off on tangent, but the creators.
Alan Richardson.
Falconer. Yeah.
You know Falconer?
Yeah.
Did
you?
I
know. I went to school with his little brother. And
no way, Eric Falconer.
And his other brother, who is the Bruins staff, the equipment manager.
Yeah. Great dudes. Great dudes.
Great family.
Yeah. So Eric Falconer and Chris Romansky are the creators, and then Alan Richardson plays Thad. And so, who's a
funny show, super funny show. Like,
yeah.
Oh my God, that show got us, like, all my roommates. When I went to college at UH, we all watched that show. We loved it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, here, one quick little fun story. So when we were shooting the movie, The Rise to Thadland.
Yeah, I saw it.
We were doing the cookie race on set at like 3:00 in the morning. It was fun.
It was awesome.
It was fun. Yeah,
that's so awesome. That's so cool, because I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I produced that movie with Alan, and great experience, great team of people, Faulkner, Romansky, Richson, phenomenal people. And so I then got recruited over because I was an independent producer who had what we call an overall deal with Palm Star Media Capital. And I wanted to have a little bit more control over my project. So this one large firm recruited me over on the condition that we established brick and mortar in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the Midwest, because in the film industry, we want to capture the tax credit because it's a negative cost to our budget. So that all being said, we were considering starting to split time between LA, Cincinnati, and New York, where we also had an office. And my extended family members suffer from borderline personality disorder. And at the time I was so naive to mental illness, addiction, because I had predominantly come from a world of sleep when you're dead, don't use the brake pad. If you cry, you're weak, shake a firm hand, look everybody in the eye, and as much as I believe in some of that, I also have maybe it's the left-handedness in me, like the creative side of me as well.
Yeah.
And which is more sensitive in nature, which
Sure.
I was not in tune with at all. And filmmaking really helped that, come to the surface, but still that was ingrained in me. And so I didn't know much about mental illness at all. So that being said, for 10 years of my marriage, I have kind of dubbed this term of like learned helplessness, where that's a slow erosion of the self. There's a powerless feeling when we're confronted with trauma and tyranny and malevolence, of which our young family was being attacked that way. And it was that personal touch, because originally we weren't supposed to just live in Cincinnati, but within 1 month we had threats of handwritten letters, of lawsuits, and et cetera, because we had moved out of our home. Now we're renting the in-laws' home temporarily. And within a month, my world went from, let's just say, predictable. I had responsibility, accountability, the provider, a husband, a father, and that all was uprooted within a month. And now we're living in Cincinnati. And so the culmination over time eroded my sense of self. There was like a cognitive dissonance with myself between my actions, my beliefs, and then my actions. And I allowed this element in my life to, in many ways, take me over. So we moved to Cincinnati. Upon the move, I am a helper by trade. So I'm helping unpack the boxes with the movers, and I rupture a disc in my lower back. And then my marriage was in turmoil because of her dedication, unilateral dedication and loyalty to her personality disorder parents. And so I felt very alone. And now I have physical pain that I started to drink too much because I had a really hard time walking. And she's also a film producer, very successful. We have a great friendship right now and will forever. I still love her dearly. But all of that came at a cost, which was me nearly losing my life, as progressive.
You said when you hurt your back, was painkillers an issue, or you just
No.
coped it with drinking?
All booze, all
really?
alcohol.
So that's how you got over the pain? Really?
Yeah, there was no marijuana. There was no cross addiction for me. It was just anything and everything I could drink to numb the physical pain. The physical pain of that sciatic nerve pain. If anybody watching or listening has gone through back issues, namely sciatica, man, it's awful. I don't wish that upon my worst enemy. I really don't. And so, so I started drinking with like a 6-7 month old and a 3-year-old. And I was trying to carry on. Now I'm on the financing side of films, which I'm in a desk now, or in a cubicle like type setting, financing a lot of movies, but I wasn't out on set and all that. So I was alone when I was working, because mom is also a film producer, so she's on set. And I had 2 little baby girls to also take care of which I couldn't even hold. So I started drinking, and it took me about 2.5 years to hit a real hard, solid rock bottom. And I had many rock bottoms along the way where I should have been in the hospital, but I detoxed myself, and I didn't understand how dangerous that was, at the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was that personal touch. And then we gain awareness. I went to inpatient rehab down in Florida. And that's where I started to try to understand myself, surrounded by fellow brokenness, if you will. And alcoholism for me was a long time coming, you know, because I can remember being in LA and going into our closet in the morning and thinking to myself, like, man, I could, you know?
Yeah.
And that's you're on the edge of a cliff when you start thinking like that. Or when you start having that last drink when everyone else is ready to go home, and you kind of like, everyone's up top on a deck or in somebody's condo rooftop, and you kind of sneak down saying you have to go to the bathroom, which you do, and you plug into the kitchen and you take a couple and then you come back up. Like those.
Dude, that was my MO, Eric, man. I would do that every time I drank. I would sneak away to you know, even though we were there drinking, having a good time, partying up, whatever. That was my thing. That was like my move. I would go sneak away, and so pathetic, man. It's so like scary and weird, and I was like in fear of my life. But I would go into different rooms, grab a bottle, and just chug it, you know, hoping that no one would walk in or whatever, go to the bathroom or something. You know, that's you know, I was just like that, man. I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop. I just wanted more and more. I wanted that feeling so bad, like that initial feeling when you get, you know, like a shot or whatever. That's what I was chasing like forever.
Yeah, because there was always a point in my life. I've had a lot of people tell me to do things throughout my life where I didn't feel like I had necessarily had a voice. And what kind of naturally spun out of that, you know, because up until the point of around 8 years old, our frontal lobe is still developing, and we don't have a self identity yet. You know, I might be the doctor playing with my sister Barbie dolls, and then I'm outside being Superman, and then I'm jumping off a couch being somebody else. Like, we don't have a sense of identity, right, until we're a little bit older. And then the identity for me was I was an athlete and an athlete only. And then I traded one high octane industry for another. And then I became identified by this filmmaker guy. And then those environments, you know, are very tough, but there's a lot of patting on the back and good jobs and yeses that are all false. You know, one thing that I had to learn the hard way is, like, when you go away for a while, you'll find out who the people are who really love you.
Oh yeah. That couldn't be more true, man. Couldn't be more true. Yeah. When you're struggling and you start noticing people are distancing themselves from you, that's sad. But it's super common, right?
Yeah. And so as I kept getting older and older and older, I never took the time. Nobody taught me. I had no infrastructure in learning who is Eric Fischer, the being with a capital B. Who am I? What are my values? What's my purpose? What's my calling? Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? You know, do I believe in God? Do I not? Because growing up in the Catholic school system, I unilaterally was forced to believe in God, whether I wanted to explore something different or not. It was like, here's some sugar and eat it, even though I don't, you know, like the taste.
Yeah.
You know,
same,
so to speak. So I had to learn all that in rehab, and then find out and be able to articulate it through writing and leaning into my curiosities and doing extreme deep dives with my psychologists and people around me in psychology.
The
finding
true
out who I
essence
was.
of who you are, right? Because I mean, I feel like a lot of athletes and people in that world, like Hollywood and stuff, there's no getting to know the true self for a lot of these people. It's just, you know, very ego based, and then all of a sudden they're working up the ladder, and then there's this person, and they got a mansion, they're looking around like, why am I not happy, right? Because they never did like the work, like the true work that you've done. Can you so you talked about you had a couple of rock bottoms. What was the one that really kind of put everything in perspective for you? Like, oh my God, like, what's going on with my life?
Yeah, well, I didn't really know what withdrawals were. This is how naive I was. You know, I was used to the hangover, and I'd pound water and carry on throughout my day, you know, so when the withdrawals started happening, I thought I was having panic attacks, which now I know they are in many ways panic attacks, because your body, like, those shakes are no good, you know, and the throw ups and I mean, I would get so bad oftentimes that I couldn't walk up steps. I could barely, literally barely get out of bed. And so I still was unaware I was alive, but I was dead many, many different ways. But the hard truth was when mom was on a movie. And so I was, again, alone with the kids, and she confronted me and said, I think that we need to take care of this. And again, being my old self, I didn't listen. And then I woke up and the kids did not get off the bus, and she drew her line in the sand, as she should have. And there it started. I went to rehab for the first time, but I went because I was forced to go.
Yeah.
Because of the family element and my kids and my wife. And and as a father and provider, she provides too. I'm not saying that she doesn't work. She does quite well for herself.
Sure.
Very, very, very beautiful and smart woman. Yet I wasn't like, nobody's going to help us through this, nobody except
it has
us.
to
And
be,
we have to do it. We have to
right?
voluntarily surrender. And until you're willing to bend your knee to this and say, I'm done, you're going to relapse. The clock is ticking for you. And it was ticking for me. And so I went to rehab for 2 months. We're split at this point in time. And that wasn't enough for me. That wasn't enough. And so I battled the addiction for another roughly 2 years, on and off. See, I was a binge drinker, so something would happen, right? So us alcoholics, I can only speak for myself, but I was running from something that I couldn't see, couldn't smell, couldn't taste, couldn't hear, but it was right in front of my face. And like Carl Jung, Stoicism, philosophy, Marcus Aurelius says,
I love it. I'm obsessed with it. Yeah.
Yeah. The obstacle is the way, famously says, and Jordan Peterson, if you do not turn and face what it is that you need to face. This is Carl Jung too. If you don't turn and face what it is that you need to face, it's going to come and get you. It's going to chase you down. And when tyranny smacks you in the face, you won't be ready for it. And you will bend the knee to the bottle because we can't handle it, And so it's like, and then we ask ourselves, well, why does that happen? And I feel as though many of us don't understand our personality traits. We don't understand why we say and do certain things. The intentionality and the way we're living isn't there because we don't have awareness. We're not able. I'm like the spokesman for this. I wasn't able to get on the balcony with myself and move myself around without emotion and look through a lens as an objective lens. And then some philosophers will say, there's nothing objective in the world, right? Everything's subjective. So depending on who you're talking to, but for layman terms, it's like I wasn't able to get on the balcony or take a satellite view of myself and move myself around and say, well, Eric, there's a Y in the road. Which way are you going to take it? Are you going right or left? And so I suffered the consequences, because of that. And and so what ultimately ended up happening was, and this is all during COVID as well, the beginning of COVID. And so there's that isolation that we all know about and felt. And so I ended up moving to Minneapolis, and within a month I was so sick that I don't even know how many bottles I drank, but I couldn't stand up. I was in psychosis. I had all these imaginary friends laying in bed.
So you were drinking yourself to psychosis?
Yeah.
I touched on that a little bit, but not to the extent that you're talking about right now.
Yeah. And so it got to a point where I had all these imaginary friends. I wasn't working, wasn't eating. And I knew I needed to eat. So I would crawl on my hands and knees from the bed to the bathroom to just have enough. Cause I knew I needed water, but I also knew 5 minutes after drinking it, I was going to throw it up. And I thought to myself, I'm going to detox myself again and I'm going to keep this a secret. And I had a best friend who I grew up with, who had died a year earlier from alcoholism. And I remember laying in bed, looking up, not knowing the day or time, not knowing much at all, really.
So you had a really close friend that died from liver failure, or they just drank themselves to death?
He walked into his apartment and told his roommate that he's going to take a nap and never woke up.
Oh my God, that can happen.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Just never woke up. He fell asleep. He goes, "Hey man, I'm going to take a nap." And his roommate was going to work, and he knocked on his door, and his name was Anthony, and he goes, Ant, I'm going to work." No answer. Popped in, and his eyes were blue, crystal blue, body cold. He's dead. And so I remember,
I'm so sorry. That's awful. It's tragic.
Yeah, awful. And I remember laying in bed thinking to myself, like, God, give me one more night. Give me one more night. And I would turn on ESPN on my phone, and I would just lay in bed every 5 minutes, throwing up, not being able to walk, didn't eat for a week, and just drinking handles of vodka and handles of gin. And so I called my ex, I called my mother. Well, what I had, it's interesting because we have these moments of profound clarity as well.
Yeah.
So I remember things like it was just moments ago. And then other things, I have no idea what happened. But so I got into an Uber and managed to go to a gas station and buy some Gatorades. And I came back and I got out of the Uber and my hands were shaking so bad and I have no idea how I mustered to even stand at this point. This is 2 days into me detoxing myself. And I tried to get into my place and I couldn't. And I fell back on my head. And I thought when I came up, I thought people were in the bushes looking at me. Nobody was there. But in my head, what I saw was as real as it could possibly have been. I managed to get in and I sat down and I couldn't see. I turned on the TV and I couldn't see. And I called my mom and I said, Mom, I'd fallen and I hadn't spoken to her in a week because of my drinking. So maybe not a week, 4 or 5 days. And then add 2 days of detox to that. So yeah, basically about a week. And I called her and I said, should I call my ex because she was down the street because I think I need to go to the hospital? And that was the moment. So I did. She came over, called 911. I'm in the hospital with all these needles on me. They gave me I don't know how many bags of Pitocin and saline and everything else. And I spent 3 or 4 days in the hospital, checked myself out, and ended up in a bar and barefoot with hospital booties on.
Holy.
And I was walking around Minneapolis, and I went into a hotel. When I'd moved to Minneapolis, I stayed in a hotel for a couple of days because I lost my home too. I had to get rid of my home in Cincinnati because my ex is from Minneapolis. So she had taken the kids here, and I owned a baseball facility in Cincinnati, and COVID shut us down. So I was traveling back and forth from Minneapolis to Cincinnati for about a year to see the kids. And we were trying to figure out what we were going to do, and I was the issue here. So that being said, I'm walking around these bars and
so you're in a bar with the hospital stuff on? Or
I still have my bracelets on. Yeah. And the doctor said, you can't walk. He wheeled me out. I got an Uber, and my intention was to go to detox. He gave me the address, but I was hallucinating to the point where I thought I was being followed on my phone. And I thought people were into my bank accounts and all this stuff. So I popped into a bar and I had chicken wings, and I had these 3 people, 2 men, 1 African-American, 1 white guy, and 1 blonde woman, all fictitious, all in my head, who were trying to grab the chicken wings. And so I was that guy swatting at them, and I got kicked out. I walked to another hotel, got kicked out because I was hallucinating. And I finally made it back to the hotel that I'd stayed at. And I told the woman at the front desk, I said, there's people after me. You need to call the police. So the police showed up, and they asked two officers showed up, and they said, are you okay? And I gave him some runaround answer. And I went upstairs to my room and I laid on the bed in the pitch black dark. And there was some feeling that came over me call it some sort of divine intervention, if you will. And I said, I'm going away for as long as it takes for me to never do this again. And the next day I was on a plane to detox of South Florida.
That is a wild story, Eric. That is wild. Did you hit your head when you fell back on those steps going back into your place?
I had a big black eye.
Oh, you sent me the picture. I can put that up.
So that's put that up, because that's the intake picture in rehab.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'd lost all this weight. I weighed 100.
So you were drinking so much that you were hallucinating?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I didn't know, like, it was so bad. I mean, I didn't even know the day. I didn't know the time. I don't know how I got into that Uber to go get Gatorades and come back when I fell. I have no idea, because for 3 days, 3 days straight, and it was progressive, right? You start with a drink, you escape. Now I shut the world off to me. I shut everybody off. No return phone calls from work, family. It didn't matter. It was me inside of my place drinking, because I couldn't deal. I was not man enough to deal with what I needed to deal with, which was the issues with my back, which are now solved. I thought I could solve the issues with getting back surgery, which I did. They did not. It was the personal touch. It was my personal life. It was 10 years of attacks. It was 9 years in a lawsuit from a film that I'd produced. A huge lawsuit ensued. And we came out of that lawsuit just fine. But all these pieces take its toll on a person. And that's that learned helplessness, that I'm talking about. It's that feeling that my efforts are not bearing any fruit. And that creates this sense of frustration and anxiety and despair. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I just didn't know how to deal with it. I had never faced anything. I've been on large stages. I've been in stadiums. I've been on the carpet. I mean, but the lawsuit didn't break me. The lawsuit played a role, but it's when somebody touches you with tyranny and malevolence, it's personal.
Sure.
That's what I didn't know how to cope with, and what I should have done is addressed it right away. But you don't know what you don't know, and I didn't have a self-identity. I didn't know what my purpose, my values were. Now I'm very, very, very clear on these, but I just didn't know. And so I ultimately was the one who suffered, and I hurt all those around me in the process.
Yeah. I'm just imagining that situation that you're going through, what you went through when you were in the Uber, and then you're getting out and you're going into different places, and you're not, I'm thinking back on my own life, when it was at my worst, and I was doing some of that stuff. Like, I took a job briefly, and it was like the stupidest job, just to like prove to my wife that I could get another job during like the really bad times. And it was a job where I would travel, and I went to like St. Louis, and I didn't even do the job. I just drank myself to like a coma almost, and she doesn't even know about that. She might get pissed that I'm telling about this, but that's what happened. Like, I was drinking so much that I was like basically trying to almost do what your friend did, like die in my bed. Like, that's how it felt. Like, I think that's what my goal was. That's how depressed and just lost and hopeless I was,
Yeah.
Crazy stuff, what we do. Like, alcohol is such a depressant that it compounds itself on top of whatever issue that you have, to the extent where you almost can't get out of that without help. So let's talk about that. So once that crazy ordeal you went through went down, man, you finally checked yourself in willingly the next time. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. So I voluntarily waved the flag, and so now I'm in South Florida, outside of Orlando, and they took my phone, and I got into rehab around 2:00 in the morning. And I was around, it was interesting looking back, that I thought I was going to be going to rehab with a bunch of criminals and a bunch of street type folks. And I was so wrong, because I was in rehab with some of that crowd, but attorneys and mothers who dropped their kids off at school and then start drinking because dad's at work all the time, and they didn't feel like they had their own purpose. I mean, I was surrounded by this brokenness, and that was the first time, like, I follow Brene Brown quite a bit. I follow all these I read a lot now. I write a lot now, and try to always be learning. And Brene Brown says, we all think we have courage, but without vulnerability, there's no such thing as any type of courageous attempt. And I found that to be true because it was the first time that I could be vulnerable inside of a group and not feel shamed or not feel like I'm being soft or any of this other type of quote unquote like manliness, if you will. And so I spent roughly a month, 3 weeks there, and then came back up to.
Was it hard for you to buy? Because I know when people go to rehab, but you went willingly, so it's probably different for you. But yeah, was it one of those facilities where it was kind of hard to buy in at first, but then the longer you stayed there, or was it just from the jump? Like I was going to be an open book when it comes to everything.
Was in.
You bought in,
man. Quick. I was so in. I was so in, and yeah, I was in, and I'm still in. It's like there's only
you're committed now.
Yeah, but it was, and I'm lucky to be alive. I really do feel like that because I remember the doctor telling me that you don't have any potassium. My potassium levels were crashing. And I remember him saying that without potassium, your heart doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And I was in the hospital bed when he told me that, still in psychosis. But those are those little moments of clarity that we have. And that is, I can still hear that man's voice. I can hear that man's voice the same way I can hear that second grade teacher when I wrote down on a sheet of paper and responded to the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I put Major League Baseball player down, and she came back over to my desk and crossed it out and said, put something down more realistic. I hear that woman's voice too. And that's been a driver for me. People that are naysayers, I take that and it's like, watch me.
That's awesome. I can't believe a teacher. I always hear those stories when, a teacher told me I couldn't do this, and I never had that. So I never experienced that. But I mean, I can't believe a teacher would compromise someone's, or just stifle their creativity or their willingness to excel in life. Like, it's so ridiculous that a teacher would tell you that, but I'm glad that I'm almost glad they did, in the sense that you took it as fuel into, really supercharge your life and work at everything to prove that you can do it, and you did do it. So that's kudos to you, man. So your story is unbelievable, man. You've lived a fascinating life, and it's truly a testament to your strength and courage and vulnerability. That's something actually you kind of want to jump back into when you mentioned the vulnerability aspect of it, of sobriety. What do you think, in your opinion, was the hardest thing for you to let your guard down in relation to your personality? Like, what was that thing that you were trying to hold back so long that you didn't want to open up about, or you were running away from, or whatever? I don't know if I worded that right, but
yeah, no, I think I've got you. It's a good question. Couple things come to mind. I had to redefine failure for myself. I had to, because previous to this, it was, if you don't come in first place, your effort means nothing, meaning my effort, which is untrue, because we learn when we fail. It's how you define it.
That's like every single failure in my life has, in some way or another, made me a better person. Or
yeah, I'm with you on that as well. I mean, I now enjoy failure. I mean, I've had failure in my life. Obviously you don't win every game you pitch, and you don't secure financing to every film you produce, and the girl doesn't say yes every time. Every girl doesn't say yes to you. There's always failure. Mean, you can make it have some comedy with it, but in a real sense, I had to redefine that for myself. I also had to learn how to listen. I had to learn how to listen and not talk so much, because it's not always my way or the highway, and things aren't black and white. We live in a world of gray. And once I understood that in a real sense, what happened is my life started to slow down, and I could see the world through a lens of hope for myself now.
Yeah.
And that was because of rehab initially.
Yeah. So the rehab was in Florida you went to?
Yeah, I went to rehab in Florida, roughly 3 weeks inpatient. And then I continued for 4 months, 3 days a week.
Wow.
Outpatient and ICU. I think that's what they call it, right? Intensive outpatient.
Well, yeah. So there's outpatient facilities. Okay. Yes.
IOP. So 3 hours a day, twice a week for 4 months.
Wow. Did you?
And then I teamed up with psychologists, and I went as deep as you can go into myself, all the way back from my first memory. And I've surrounded myself inside of the worlds of psychology, neuroscience, spirituality, human behavior, personality traits, and philosophy.
You just nailed all my favorite subjects, man.
And it's the search. There's no pinnacle towards the correct upwards aim. And that means we have to search for the meaning of life. And that's, it's like they say in the planes, if the plane's going down, put the mask on yourself first. Take care of yourself first, because that's the only way in which we can help and support and love and care for those around us inside of our own home, And so 100%. I had to learn all that. And so I stripped cable. I stripped anything as much. Now I have kids, so some of this is, there's some fun in it, of course, with what we watch. Me, when I'm by myself, I don't watch anything that I'm not, two things that I'm educational information that I'm curious to learn more about.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the topics, that's storytelling. Our life is a story. This is Jordan Peterson. And it's like, he views our lives through story. And I find that to be true.
Oh God, yeah.
And so I enjoy balanced two-way conversations like we're having right now. That's how we learn. And so I surround myself, whether it be a book or something I'm watching on, say, YouTube or what have you, that touches on one of those topics.
Yeah. Isn't that so funny? I'm the same exact way. So once I woke up from the transplant, I swore that, that's it for me. Alcohol is just that is just never going to enter my life. I was left with all this extra time, and it like all the crap junk that I was just fueling into my body for my whole life. Honestly, the second I woke up, all of a sudden I had all these different interests. This is like the point I'm getting to. Let me go attack every single thing that sparks interest or excitement in my life. Right. And that's the thing. That's another Jordan Peterson thing that he talks about often too, is like, just because you get sober, like, hit pat on the back, man, like good for you. But now you got to go find that thing that sparks that feeling in you that is just as equally as awesome as the booze of like once did to you, or whatever a substance that you were putting in your body beforehand. And that's awesome that you started searching all these, men search for meaning. Different.
That's Viktor Frankl. Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Yeah. And Viktor says, like, those who find the why to live anyhow is easy.
Mm-hmm. The why,
why,
and then that why
how's easy.
I mean, that's like, I think that's one of the biggest issues I think with people who are struggling to get sober is they haven't found that why yet. And that why comes to everyone in all individual basis. It's very difficult to find your why, especially if you don't know who you are, you're lost, you're confused, you don't know anything else. And then when you get sober and all of a sudden you're sitting there, by yourself in your own thoughts. And sometimes those thoughts get really dark. I mean, they did for me at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very dark. And one thing that helped me find, I'd say to help the momentum and growth, was sitting on my bed by myself and asking myself, what is one thing that I know I'm doing wrong to screw up my life?
Mm-hmm.
That I would fix, that I could fix. And you don't need an answer for that right away, because you'll get an answer and it won't be the one you want, but it'll just sit with you. What's one thing that I'm doing wrong to screw up my life that I would fix, that I could fix, or that I could fix, that I would fix? And that really helped. And I learned that from Jordan Peterson. He was saying that, and Jordan is so wise. And I took that serious, because that has to be a serious question that you ask yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be,
it can't be a bullshit. Yeah. It can't be bullshit. You have to really, really go. That's why I have my little gratitude journal, and I use this for everything. It's like my sobriety Bible. And, when I realized that I'm sober now and I have to figure out like who am I, just word vomiting, just free writing. Like, okay, what's bugging me? Like, why is it bugging? To start in, and then and then you just go through it. It's sometimes like after I do it, I'll just rip out the page, throw it out, and start again. And then I'll start, okay, like, how do I fix these things? Like, how can I like logistically fix these issues in my life? Even if it's just like a little bit better, like just a little bit better. Like, how can I start to sharpen the knife of like of who I am, my identity, my soul, my passions, my dreams, everything. Like, how do I get to these things? Like, and I think journaling is a super helpful, well, at least for me, resource in regards to getting out your thoughts on paper and being able to like see them. Because when you put them all in your head, it's easy to just forget everything. But when you put it down on paper, it's this weird thing happens, putting things on paper and then visualizing, like manifesting all that stuff. I'm getting all over the place here. But yeah, I think journaling in itself is like super beneficial to every aspect of life, trying to figure out who you are and what direction you want to go and that kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Journaling with a pen and a piece of paper is intentional thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And intentional thinking is praying. It's actively praying when you write and when you think.
Can you go into that a little bit more? What do you mean by that?
When people have trouble praying, right? And we ask God for this and we ask for forgiveness in this. And my view of it is our internal dialogue, our prayers to ourselves and to others and our wishes and our hopes and our dreams. And we're asking ourselves, whether it be positive or negative, why do we think? Thinking is, and that's why therapy is so good, because we talk. Thinking and talking and writing is the ability to articulate what it is that we want out of a situation, out of our life, out of the world as a whole, out of our home, community, society, and the world at large. So I view it like if we distill that down into just our brain, what's in between our ears, our thoughts are our prayers, and we need to write down what it is that we think about, because there's nothing more dangerous than an articulate person.
Nothing more dangerous than an articulate person with what? Not knowing thyself or not knowing?
Being able to articulate what it is that we want, being able to articulate our purpose, our values, our mission, our meaning.
Yes, I got you.
And then that's intentional living in many ways as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. That's rather abstract.
No. I'm with you. I'm with you now.
But yeah, I do. I feel like if we think in a positive nature, we are praying to ourselves and some sort of higher power, whether that be God, or I've come across people that feel as though, nature and the universe. Marcus Aurelius writes about this.
Yeah, meditations. Best.
Nature and the universe, and make sure we're in accordance with its laws.
Yeah.
So it depends how you define prayer for yourself,
It's like having faith. Faith is such an interesting word because it has that attachment to religion and things like that. But I honestly look at faith in a way that it doesn't have to have that connotation with the religion component. I think faith in yourself is almost like a belief in a higher power because you're believing in yourself. I feel like I have faith in myself again, like I lived my whole life without that. Yeah. And by studying all the different areas of searching for meaning in life and being this person that you want to be, and then acting as if until you get, fake it till you make it kind of thing. That's something that I started to practice more, because everyone just wants that end result, but the progress, the journey is actually the reward, and in having faith in yourself and being intentional about, okay, like these are my decisions today, and this is how I'm going to approach them in like a very open, vulnerable way of doing it is having faith in yourself and being the person that you eventually will become if you just act as that person. I think it was actually Rogan who actually once said, talked about how, like, if your life was a movie and you were watching that movie objectively and you're watching the screen of your life and you started to get to the scene of, like, my liver transplant or whatever, like, what would the hero, picture yourself like watching a movie. What would the hero do in this situation? Like, what would they do next? Right. Mm-hmm. If you frame it that way, I feel like there's a lot of growth that can happen, because now all of a sudden you start thinking like, okay, well, what would the hero do in my movie right now? They would get sober. They would repair relationships. They would get physically fit. They would get mentally fit. They would start checking off all these boxes. And at the end of the movie, you're like, what? That guy's going to have the good rest of his life. You know, look at him. Like, look at how that movie just ended, you know? That's isn't that kind of a fun way?
It is, you know, and I think that's insightful because we have no problem saying something like that to somebody else.
Yes.
But how often are we able to say that to ourselves, you know, to help ourselves out along our own hero's journey? And that goes back into life being viewed through a story. You know, like if you distill out yesterday, your 24 hours yesterday, you'd probably only be interested in maybe a half hour, 45 minutes of what you actually did if you were to watch it back.
Mm-hmm.
But that's that day over day growth too, you know, be a little bit better than you were yesterday. And then over time, over a month, you have an hour's worth of footage. And then the better you become, the more intentional you are. It's like, you know, closing the loop. If you start something, ensure that you finish it. It's like, you know, making your bed in the morning.
Yeah.
It's the first thing to start off a day on a positive note.
Yeah. Tim Ferriss has a really cool thing. He talks about in one of his books, I forget which one it was, but he talks about if it takes 5 minutes, right? If it only takes 5 minutes to do that thing that you're avoiding, just do it because it's only 5 minutes, right? Whether it be empty the dishwasher, make your bed, you know, doing those 5 minute incremental annoyances that no one wants to do, you'll start noticing you stop avoiding those things. You actually start pursuing them because you start realizing, oh, like the more I'm doing these 5 minute things, these tasks, I'm realizing that it's making my life simpler in that process.
What it's doing is it's reinforcing that positive feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
And we get these little dopaminergic, like little hits. I don't like the term dopamine hit, but we do when we complete something, because otherwise, if we start it, let's say 50%, we put it aside and say, you know, I'll get to it later. That stays open in our brain, and that creates friction, and that creates anxiety, and that little burn in the chest that we're all so aware of, you know. And but when we close the loop, it's a positive feedback loop. And then our brain wants more of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it releases more and more dopamine each time we pick up a sock that's laying in our bedroom and throwing it in the hamper, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of walking over it, you know, or like when we do laundry, instead of letting the clothes sit in the dryer and then we pull them out and they're wrinkled, you know, pull them out when they're still warm so you can fold them and look a little better when you walk around this earth. You know?
I struggle with that.
All those we all do that. We all let
typical guy trade, just throw it all in the same whites and darks and just make it all messy. You know, I'm the same way. But it's
and starting small. You know,
you gotta start small. You can't just be like, okay, I'm gonna get sober. You know, going back to the sober. But you know, I'm gonna do this, and all of a sudden you burn out, because that's just a recipe for burnout. Is if you don't. If you have a goal too high and you're trying to reach that too quickly, that it's just, you're going to just fall off. I feel like that's most people's failures in life I think can be associated with that, you know, trying to reach a goal too quickly instead of knowing that, you know, anything good in life takes time, takes a lot of time, a lot of work to get to get the results. I mean, you've worked in so many different areas in your life, whether it be movies or athletics, you know, it's you have to put the work in to get the results. You know, you can't just have a goal and then all of a sudden the next day then you're getting a product.
Yeah, right. I mean, people are envious of the folks they see on TV, and they're envious of that actor, actress, the big CEO that they may look up towards or up to, or the athlete or what have you. People are envious of the achiever, but they're not envious of the work that it took to get there.
Right. Exactly.
You know?
Like Kobe Bryant. I was watching a Kobe Bryant thing the other day, and he was talking about like how he started realizing, like, to be great in a great league, right? You have to get up at the gym before everyone else, be the first one there. Like Brady, he's my idol. I love Tom Brady. So he talked about that, you know, he was always the first one in, last one out kind of thing. You hear that all the time in athletics. But yeah, like that mindset, that mentality, that wanting it more than somebody else, like really wanting it more, like not just saying it, well, I want it more, like, oh, I'm the best, just really wanting it more and putting that work in, like those 3 a days, you know, that Kobe Bryant was doing. It was just, that's why he was so good. Brady.
Yeah. And you stack those up, and then it compounds too, you know, and then people can't catch up to you. They can't catch up to your growth. They're always in your rear view because you're stacking the minutes and hours and days. And then it really does snowball, and you can feel that too.
Oh yeah.
The person can feel
contagious,
that growth, and you want more of it. That's your new addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Is that day over day growth, setting an upwards aim and Jacob laddering one step at a time towards it. And there's a lot of humility in aiming low. If you're not willing to aim extremely low to start, that's your ego and your pride working against you or working on you.
Yeah, that's beautifully put there, Eric. Hey, speaking of aiming and doing more with your life, you were mentioning about how you're now segueing your career into this world, helping others, coaching, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love it. I'm just getting started. I've been coaching for 23 years, and I feel like, it's interesting. As a male, I'm more interested in people than things. And that's a female trait, large in part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Females are usually more interested in people, and us males are more interested in things. That's why the engineering world is mainly male dominant.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at nursing and, it's largely female. But I am interested in helping as many people as I can, through mentorship, influence, storytelling, like we're doing right now. So I'm just now forward facing. I feel like it's time. I feel like I'm ready to help as many people as I can, whether it be one-on-one, some group stuff, or if they just want to tune in to my podcast coming up. And obviously they're in tune with yours. I'm about to launch a podcast.
Do you have a name yet?
Yeah, it's called Intrinsic.
Intrinsic.
Yeah. So
I love that.
It's the opposite of extrinsic, right? It's process over results. It's one step at a time. It's living for yourself, not living for the trophy or that proverbial paycheck. It's intuition over intellect.
Yeah.
And it's finding and following your meaning of life. And if I can help people find that for themselves, then I'm in.
Yeah. Isn't that so interesting? People, it's almost like this big secret that no one knows, but it totally exists, is that everyone is good at something. Like every single human on this planet has a skill that they're better at than somebody else.
So true.
And that skill is very subtle and sometimes very difficult to find within yourself. But if you pursue that skill that you're really good at, whether that be talking, sports, whatever, cooking, who cares? And you pursue that with like the genuine excitement that it gives back to you, and you're coming from it from like a serving perspective, like serve others, and then you get it back to you. Eventually, you do that enough, and you get good at it enough, and you excel at it enough that eventually, don't worry about the money, because the money will eventually come to you because you're pursuing that dream and that skill that you're really good at, and then eventually the universe will kind of hook you up in like you always hear about that. Like every time I hear about like a guest or someone like that comes on a Rogan's podcast or whatever, and they're talking about that idea, they do mention that all the time, how like there was no money, but then they didn't give up on their dreams. They didn't give up on their creative, whatever made them unique and special. And they pursue that dream. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, they're movie stars or whatever, CEOs, whatever, you name it. Anyone successful has like that kind of, they know that and they figure that out. And then that's why they're successful. It's because they worked at everything. They worked it all through.
Yeah. Well said. The financial component of our life should be a byproduct of us exploring.
You said it right there.
Exploring our talents, and and that's sustainable, right? Because when we talk about burnouts and we talk about goals are finite. And when we include dopamine into that, once I obtain that trophy, there's a depression, there's a letdown in a way. And I have to find a new goal. I have to pivot and turn. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But if there's a forever search, once we identify what it is that we're talented at, for everybody's different. For some people, it's numbers. Other people, it's more abstract and philosophical. Other people, it's more English based.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever it is, you lean in, and lean in as hard and as early as you can.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, once, from my experience, like if you don't choose what it is that you want to do in your life, it'll be chosen for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when people get into trouble,
Yeah.
myself included. And they get to decide what trouble means to them when it comes knocking on the door. My aim is to bring together professional baseball, 23 years of coaching athletes and high performers, intimately working with actors, directors, writers to build character and build story and to build narrative. Furthermore, with my studies in these elements that we had spoken about, right? Philosophy and psychology and a little bit of neuroscience and human behavior and personality traits, which I find are foundational to change. Understanding somebody's big 5 personality traits. We all have each of them, but in varying degrees, right? And that really helps people change just that alone. But take all that, spin it into a web that can help support others.
Awesome, Eric. Eric Fischer, everybody. That was beautiful.
It's been fun. This has been a fun conversation.
Cool,
I love it.
Yeah, I love talking with you, man. I feel like I could talk to you for days. You know, we have so many similar interests. It's awesome. It's really cool. I think we're gonna be good friends after this.
Yeah, this is gonna be sweet.
Yeah,
I'm so
excited to see where you go with this, man. From going from being a professional athlete to the movie business to producing and all that stuff to being at your lowest low and to getting yourself out of there. Oh my God. Like the amount of willpower, determination, the willingness to change, like you're going to crush it, man. You're just going to crush it. I can just feel it. I'm so excited for you.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it's exciting. Thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah.
I hope we do another one and, you know,
yeah, absolutely.
Godspeed to all of us.
Godspeed. So wait, before we jump off, Eric, where can people find you?
On YouTube, Eric Mark Fischer. My name's spelled with a C,
right.
Fischer. Yeah, it always, my whole life I've been spelling that
that's
last
a pain in the ass, isn't it?
And then website all the time. Yeah, ericmarkfischer.com. I'm just starting some socials. So it's my name on Insta, it's my name on Facebook, etc. So, but awesome. My main platform is going to be engaging with some of the most interesting people I can find and having deep, layered, comprehensive conversations.
Hell yeah, brother.
It's going to be cool.
That's what I'm talking about too. Okay. Well, Eric, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and be on the lookout for many, many more. Take care, everybody. Have a great one. Thanks, Eric.
Peace.